The sunlight danced through the ancient oak trees as Ethan Hayes secured the final board of the cattle pen. His weathered hands bore the calluses of a man who had known hard work all his life. At 40, his face carried the lines of both laughter and sorrow, but his eyes reflected a spirit that refused to be broken. He never expected that a broken cart and a woman's tears would lead him to ask a complete stranger to be his wife. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ethan stepped back to admire his handiwork, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The Circle H Ranch wasn't the largest in Clearwater Valley, Montana, but it was his. 300 acres of rolling pastures, pine-studded ridges, and the silver ribbon of Coldwater Creek cutting through the heart of the property. He'd built it from the ground up after walking away from his rodeo days, determined to put down roots in a life that had shown him only open roads. "What do you think, Maverick?" he asked the black and white border collie sitting attentively at his feet. The dog cocked his head to one side, then barked once as if in approval. Ethan chuckled. "Glad you agree, boy. Should hold those new calves just fine." The late April air carried the scent of fresh grass and distant rain. Ethan glanced at the western sky, noting the gathering clouds. A spring storm was brewing, and he needed to finish his chores before it hit. As he gathered his tools, Maverick's ears perked up suddenly, and the dog rose to his feet, alert. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, following the dog's gaze down the long dirt road that connected his ranch to the highway. In the distance, he could make out a horse-drawn cart moving slowly, almost listing to one side. It was an unusual sight, even in these parts where some of the Amish communities still used such transportation. Curious, Ethan watched as the cart made its halting progress toward his property. As it drew closer, he could see a woman in a simple dress struggling with one of the wheels, which appeared to be damaged. The horse, a chestnut mare with a white blaze, looked exhausted. "Come on, Maverick," Ethan said, setting down his toolbox. "Looks like someone could use a hand." He made his way down the dirt path, Maverick trotting ahead eagerly. As they approached, Ethan heard a sound that stopped him in his tracks. The woman was crying, her shoulders shaking as she knelt beside the broken wheel. Her dark hair fell in a curtain around her face, hiding her from view, but her distress was unmistakable. "Excuse me, ma'am," Ethan called gently, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" The woman's head jerked up and she hastily wiped at her eyes. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of summer bluebonnets. Those eyes were rimmed red from crying, and there was a wariness in them that made Ethan approach more slowly. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice soft but with an underlying strength. "My wheel broke about a mile back, and I've been trying to get it to the next town, but it finally gave out completely." Ethan took in the situation with a practiced eye. The wheel wasn't just broken. It had completely split along an old crack. "That's not something that can be fixed on the road," he said. "You're a fair piece from town. Clearwater's still about 12 miles west." The woman's shoulders slumped slightly. "I was afraid of that." She glanced at the darkening sky. "And there's a storm coming." "I'm Ethan Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "This is my ranch you've stopped at." She hesitated before taking his hand. Her fingers were slender but calloused. Working hands. "Grace. Grace Collins." A child's voice called from inside the covered part of the cart. "Mama? Are we there yet?" Grace's expression softened instantly. "No, sweetheart. We've had some trouble with the wheel." She turned back to Ethan, her pride visibly warring with necessity. "Mr. Hayes, I hate to impose, but is there somewhere nearby where we might wait out the storm? I have a little money, not much, but—" "No need for that," Ethan interrupted gently. "You're welcome to wait at my place. I've got a barn where your horse can rest, and the house is just up that rise." Grace bit her lip, clearly torn. Before she could respond, A little girl, no more than 7, climbed out of the cart. She had her mother's blue eyes and dark hair pulled back in 2 neat braids. She wore a simple dress that had been carefully mended in several places and clutched a worn cloth doll to her chest. "Hello?" she said, regarding Ethan solemnly. Ethan crouched down to her level, keeping a respectful distance. "Hello there. What's your name?" "Emma," the little girl replied. "This is Daisy." She held up the doll. "Pleased to meet you both," Ethan said seriously, tipping his hat. "This here is Maverick." The border collie sat obediently, tail wagging slightly. Emma's eyes widened. "Is he a cow dog?" "My grandpa had a cow dog, but he went to heaven with Grandpa." "He is indeed," Ethan confirmed. "Best herder in the county." A low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley, and Grace looked anxiously at the sky. "Emma, come back to the cart, sweetheart. We need to." "You need shelter," Ethan said firmly. "That storm's going to break within the hour, and it looks to be a bad one. My ranch house is just up there. You can see it from here." He pointed to the sturdy 2-story house nestled against the backdrop of pine trees. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Grace looked from the threatening sky to her daughter, then back to Ethan. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his character. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. We accept your offer of shelter, just until the storm passes." "Ethan, please," he said. "Let's get your horse unhitched and up to the barn. I can come back for the cart once you're settled." Within 20 minutes they had the tired mare comfortably stabled in Ethan's barn. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall as they hurried toward the house, Emma skipping ahead with Maverick prancing beside her. "Your daughter seems to have made a friend," Ethan observed, carrying their single, well-worn suitcase. Grace smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "She loves animals. We haven't been able to have pets with our traveling." Ethan wanted to ask more about their circumstances, where they were heading, why they were traveling by horse and cart rather than by car or bus, but he sensed her guardedness and held his questions. Everyone had their stories, their reasons. He of all people knew that. The ranch house was modest but well-maintained. The wide covered porch wrapped around 3 sides, and the interior was open and welcoming, with wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and large windows that usually flooded the space with light, though now they streamed with rain. "It's not fancy," Ethan said, suddenly self-conscious of the bachelor simplicity of his home, "but it's dry and warm." "It's lovely," Grace said softly, looking around with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "Much nicer than—" She stopped herself. "Thank you for your hospitality." Emma had already gravitated to the stone fireplace where family photos lined the mantel. "Who are they?" she asked, pointing to a picture of a younger Ethan with an older couple. "That's me with my parents," Ethan explained, setting down their suitcase. "They passed on about 8 years back." "Like my grandpa," Emma said with a straightforward acceptance of childhood. "Do you get lonely?" "Emma," Grace admonished gently. "That's not polite to ask." Ethan smiled. "It's all right. Sometimes I do get lonely, Emma. But I have Maverick, and my horses, and the cattle to keep me company." "No wife?" Emma persisted, earning another "Emma!" from her mother. Ethan chuckled. "No wife. Never found the right lady who wanted to share a rancher's life." He cleared his throat. "You folks must be hungry. I was about to start supper when I saw you coming. Nothing fancy, but there's plenty to share." "We couldn't impose further," Grace began, but her protest was undermined by a loud rumble from Emma's stomach. "Sounds like someone could use some food," Ethan said with a wink at Emma. "I insist. It's no trouble at all." As he moved to the kitchen, Grace followed. "At least, let me help." "It's the least I can do." Ethan recognized the pride in her offer and nodded. "I'd appreciate that." They worked together in companionable silence, Ethan, preparing a simple beef stew he'd started in the slow cooker that morning, while Grace made cornbread from the ingredients he provided. There was an ease to their cooperation that surprised him. It had been a long time since he'd shared his kitchen with anyone. From the living room came the sound of Emma's delighted laughter as she played with Maverick, teaching the willing dog to shake hands with her doll. "Your daughter's a bright one," Ethan commented as he set the table. Grace's expression softened. "She is. Too smart for her own good sometimes." She hesitated, then added, "She's had to grow up faster than a child should." Ethan nodded, recognizing there was a story there, but not pressing. "Kids are resilient, though. More than we give them credit for." "Yes," Grace agreed quietly. "They are." Over dinner, Emma chatted happily about the animals she'd seen on their journey, while Grace remained reserved, answering Ethan's casual questions with polite but brief responses. He learned they were heading west, that they had family in Oregon they hoped to reach, but little else. The storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder shaking the eaves. When a particularly loud crack of thunder made Emma jump, Ethan suggested, "How about a story after dinner? I've got some books that belong to my nieces when they visit." Emma looked to her mother for permission, and Grace nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." Later, with Emma curled up on the sofa between them, Ethan read from an old book of Western tales, his deep voice bringing the adventures to life. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the warm circle of lamplight there was a sense of peace that felt both foreign and familiar to Ethan. When Emma's eyes began to droop, Grace gently roused her. "Time for bed, sweetheart." "You can use the guest room upstairs," Ethan offered. "It's all made up. My sister-in-law insists on keeping it ready for visitors, though they don't come as often as she'd like." "Thank you," Grace said, helping Emma to her feet. "For everything." As they disappeared upstairs, Ethan sat alone by the fire, Maverick at his feet. The dog looked up at him with knowing eyes, and Ethan sighed. "Don't look at me like that, boy. They'll be gone tomorrow, once the wheel's fixed." He tried not to think about how right it had felt to have them at his table, how the house seemed more like a home with their presence. The storm showed no signs of abating by morning. If anything, it had intensified, with the local radio reporting flash flood warnings for the valley. The dirt road to town would be impassable for at least a day, maybe two. "I can't fix your wheel until the rain lets up," Ethan explained over breakfast, "but you're welcome to stay until then." Grace looked troubled. "We've imposed enough already. Perhaps there's a neighbor who could drive us to town?" "Not in this weather," Ethan said firmly. "The creek crossings will be flooded. It's not safe." He softened his tone. "Please, stay. It's no imposition." Something in her expression told him she was weighing factors beyond mere convenience. "We don't want to be a burden," she said finally. "You're not," Ethan assured her. Then, seeking to ease her discomfort, he added, "Truth is, it's nice having company. This old house gets too quiet sometimes." Emma, who had been listening while feeding Maverick bits of bacon under the table, with Ethan's tacit approval, spoke up. "We could help with chores. I'm good at helping. Mama says I'm her best helper." Ethan smiled at her enthusiasm. "Well, there are some indoor chores that need doing." "What with the rain and all?" "I've got a leak in the attic that needs checking, and some mending that's been piling up." "I'm good with a needle," Grace offered, seeming relieved to have a way to repay his kindness. "And Emma can help sort buttons, can't you, sweetheart?" And so they settled into an unexpected domestic arrangement. The rain continued throughout the day, transforming the dirt roads to mud and the creek to a rushing torrent. Ethan worked in the barn, tending to the animals and making repairs he'd been putting off, while Grace tackled the pile of mending with skill that impressed him. Emma flitted between helping her mother and following Ethan around the barn, asking endless questions about the horses and cattle. By evening, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving a steady drizzle in its wake. After dinner, as Emma played with Maverick by the fire, Ethan found himself alone with Grace on the porch, watching the rain. "That's fine needlework you did today," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You've got a real talent." Grace smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Thank you. My grandmother taught me. She said a woman should know how to create beauty even in the midst of hardship." "Wise woman," Ethan commented. Then, feeling bold, he added, "If you don't mind my asking, what takes you and Emma to Oregon? You mentioned family?" Grace was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was soft but steady. "My cousin lives in a small town near Portland. She's offered us a place to stay until I can find work and get us settled." "You're starting fresh," Ethan observed. "Yes." She turned to look at him directly. "We needed a new beginning, away from—" She trailed off, but her hand unconsciously went to her left cheek, where Ethan now noticed the faint shadow of what might once have been a bruise. Understanding dawned. "I see," he said simply, not pushing for details she wasn't ready to give. Grace seemed to appreciate his restraint. "Emma doesn't know the full extent of it. I've tried to protect her from the worst, but children sense more than we think." Ethan nodded. "They do at that." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the rain pattern on the porch steps. "He found us twice before," Grace said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the rainfall. "Each time we thought we were safe, had started to build something. Each time we had to leave everything behind and run again." Ethan felt a surge of anger toward the unnamed man who had driven this woman and child to such a desperate flight. "He won't find you here," he said, the promise in his voice surprising even himself. Grace gave him a sad smile. "You can't know that, and I wouldn't bring trouble to your door, not after your kindness." Before Ethan could respond, Emma's voice called from inside. "Mama, come see what Maverick can do." The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. A trust had begun to form, fragile as new spring grass. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. After breakfast, Ethan examined the cart's broken wheel more carefully. "The wood split clean through," he told Grace as they stood in the yard. "It can't be repaired. You'll need a new wheel entirely." Grace's face fell. "I don't suppose there's a wheelwright in town?" Ethan shook his head. "Not these days. But Miller's Hardware might have something that could work, or know where to order one. I'm heading into town for supplies anyway. I can ask about it." "We'll come with you," Grace said quickly, then seemed to catch herself. "That is, if you don't mind. Emma and I could look around town while you run your errands." Something in her eagerness to accompany him struck Ethan as odd, but he nodded. "Of course. Company's always welcome." The drive into Clearwater was slow going on the muddy roads, but Ethan's sturdy truck handled it well. Emma sat between them on the bench seat, chattering excitedly about the flooded streams and wildlife they passed. Grace was quieter, her eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and the rearview mirror. Clearwater Valley was a small town of about 2,000 souls, with a main street lined with brick buildings dating back to the early 1900s. It had weathered the economic downturns better than many rural communities, thanks to a combination of agriculture, a small manufacturing plant on the outskirts, and tourism from those seeking the pristine wilderness of the nearby national forest. As they pulled up in front of Miller's Hardware, Grace's gaze swept the street, taking in every vehicle, every pedestrian. Ethan noticed her tension but said nothing as they entered the store. Ted Miller, the owner's son, greeted Ethan warmly. "Hayes! Didn't expect to see you in town so soon after that downpour. Roads must be a mess." "They are," Ethan confirmed, "but I needed feed, and my guests here had a broken wheel on their cart." He explained the situation while Grace and Emma explored the store. Ted whistled low. "A proper wagon wheel? That's not something we stock. Could order it from a specialty place in Missoula, but it'd take a week, maybe 2. Ethan glanced at Grace, who had returned in time to hear this news. Her face paled slightly. "Is there any alternative?" she asked. "We really need to continue our journey." Ted scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, old man Peterson out on Ridge Road used to restore antique wagons. Might have something that would work. He's a bit of a recluse these days, but he likes Ethan well enough. I can take you out there tomorrow," Ethan offered. "See what he's got." Grace nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "Thank you." As they continued their errands around town, Ethan couldn't help but notice how Grace kept Emma close, how her eyes tracked every passing car, every stranger who approached. At the general store, when the bell above the door jingled, she startled so violently she nearly knocked over a display of canned goods. "You all right?" Ethan asked quietly while Emma was distracted by a bin of penny candy. Grace forced a smile. "Yes, just jumpy after the storm." But Ethan wasn't convinced. Something, or someone, had this woman terrified. And it wasn't thunder and lightning. They were loading the last of the supplies into Ethan's truck when a police cruiser rolled slowly down the main street. Grace froze, her hand tightening on Emma's shoulder. "Mama, you're hurting me," Emma complained. Grace immediately relaxed her grip. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." The cruiser continued past without stopping, but Grace's relief was palpable. Ethan helped them into the truck without comment, but his mind was working, piecing together the puzzle of Grace Collins and her daughter. On the drive back to the ranch, Emma fell asleep between them, her head eventually coming to rest against Ethan's arm. The simple trust of the gesture moved him deeply. "She likes you," Grace said softly. "She doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly." "She's a special kid," Ethan replied. Then, choosing his words carefully, he added, "Grace, I don't mean to pry, but if you're in some kind of trouble—" "We're fine," she interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. Ethan took a deep breath. "I was a deputy sheriff before I took over the ranch from my parents. I know when someone's running scared." Grace stared straight ahead, her profile rigid. "It's better if you don't know the details. Safer for you." "I'm not concerned about my safety," Ethan said gently, "but I am concerned about yours and Emma's." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rumble of the truck's engine and Emma's soft breathing. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice barely audible. "My ex-husband, he's dangerous. The restraining order, the divorce, none of it stopped him. The last time he found us, he put me in the hospital." Her hand went unconsciously to her ribs. "He threatened Emma, said if I tried to run again, he'd—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "When I got out of the hospital, I took Emma and what little I could carry, and we left in the middle of the night. We've been traveling back roads, staying off the grid. The cart was my grandfather's. I thought it would be harder to trace than a car." She gave a bitter laugh. "It was a desperate plan." "It was brave," Ethan corrected her. "You're protecting your daughter." Grace turned to look at him then, really look at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Why are you helping us, Ethan? You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Ethan considered her question seriously. "My mother used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy, but what they do when it would be easier to do nothing at all." He glanced down at Emma, still sleeping peacefully against him. "Besides, you're wrong about being nothing to me. You're two human beings who needed help. That's enough." The simple sincerity of his answer seemed to touch something in Grace. For the first time since they'd met, he saw her fully lower her guard, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As they crested the hill that overlooked the Circle H, the ranch spread out before them in the late afternoon sun, peaceful and welcoming. Ethan felt an unexpected surge of pride at the sight, seeing it through new eyes. "It's beautiful," Grace said, echoing his thoughts, "like something from another time." "It is," Ethan agreed. "Been in my family for 3 generations. I almost lost it after my rodeo days, when I was too wild to see what mattered. Nearly drank and gambled it away before my father set me straight." "What changed?" Grace asked. Ethan smiled ruefully. "My father took me up to Lookout Ridge, the highest point on the property. You can see the whole valley from there. He asked me what I saw, and all I could talk about was the things that weren't there. The excitement, the crowds, the rush of competition. And he just looked at me with such disappointment and said, 'Son, if you can stand here and not see the blessing right in front of you, then maybe you don't deserve to call it yours.'" He shook his head at the memory. "Hit me like a bucket of cold water. Made me take a hard look at what I was throwing away. I've been sober 8 years now, and I haven't placed a bet in just as long." "That takes courage," Grace said softly, "to change your path." "So does what you're doing," Ethan replied. "Starting over." As they pulled up to the house, Emma stirred and yawned. "Are we home?" she asked sleepily. The innocent question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither adult was ready to address. "We're back at Mr. Hayes's ranch," Grace corrected gently. But as Ethan helped them from the truck, he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like if Emma's drowsy question had been true. If this was their home, if the empty rooms were filled with their presence permanently, if the quiet evenings were always broken by a child's laughter and a woman's soft voice. For the first time in years, the solitude he had cultivated seemed less like peace and more like emptiness. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Old Man Peterson indeed had a suitable wagon wheel, though he grumbled about folks not appreciating craftsmanship these days as he helped Ethan load it into the truck. The wheel would need some adjustments to fit Grace's cart properly, work that would take Ethan several days to complete. "I'm sorry for the delay," he told Grace as they stood in the barn, examining the wheel. "I know you're anxious to get on your way." Grace ran her hand over the smooth wood of the wheel, her expression unreadable. "It's fine. You've already done so much." In truth, Ethan found himself working on the repairs with less urgency than he might have. Each morning he woke to the sound of Emma's laughter as she helped Grace prepare breakfast, a sound that filled the once quiet house with life. Each evening they shared meals at his table, and he discovered a pleasure in conversation he'd forgotten existed. During the days, Grace insisted on earning their keep. She took over much of the cooking, revealing a talent for making simple ingredients sing. She mended not just Ethan's clothes but tackled the curtains and quilts that had gone neglected since his mother's passing. Her nimble fingers brought order and beauty to spaces that had known only functional bachelor living for too long. Emma became Maverick's devoted shadow, following the border collie on his daily rounds. Ethan showed her how to collect eggs from the henhouse and how to check for signs of predators around the property. Her questions were endless, her curiosity boundless, and Ethan found himself seeing his familiar world through her fresh eyes. "Why do you live all alone?" she asked him one afternoon as they sat on the porch steps, taking a break from their chores. Grace was in the garden harvesting early spring vegetables that had somehow survived the recent storms. Ethan considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I guess I got used to my own company. After my parents passed, it just seemed easier to keep to myself." Emma frowned, clearly finding this answer insufficient. "But don't you get lonely?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "But I've got Maverick and the horses and neighbors I see in town." "That's not the same as family," Emma declared with the certainty of childhood. "Mama says family is the people who love you no matter what, even when you make mistakes." Ethan smiled. "Your mama is a wise woman." Emma beamed at the compliment to her mother. "She is. She works really hard to take care of me. Sometimes she thinks I don't notice when she's sad or scared, but I do." The simple statement caught Ethan off guard. "Everyone gets sad or scared sometimes, Emma. Even grown-ups." "I know." Emma leaned against him, a gesture of trust that warmed his heart. "But Mama's been happier here. I can tell. She doesn't check the windows all the time like before." Before Ethan could respond to this revelation, Grace called from the garden, holding up a basket of spring greens. "Look what I found. There's enough for a salad with dinner." Emma jumped up. "Can I help wash them, Mama?" "Of course, sweetheart." As Emma ran to her mother, Ethan remained on the porch, turning the child's words over in his mind. The fact that Grace had been checking windows regularly spoke volumes about the level of fear she lived with. Yet here, on his isolated ranch, she seemed to be finding some measure of peace. The thought pleased him more than it should have. That evening, after Emma had been tucked into bed, Ethan found Grace sitting on the porch swing, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders against the spring chill. Without a word, he joined her, the swing creaking softly under their combined weight. "Emma loves it here," Grace said after a comfortable silence. "I haven't seen her this happy in a long time." "She's a joy to have around," Ethan replied honestly. "Makes the place feel alive again." Grace smiled, though there was sadness at the edges. She's always been able to find happiness in small things, a quality I envy sometimes. Children are resilient that way. Yes. Grace pulled the quilt tighter. "I worry about what all this moving has done to her, though. She deserves stability, friends her own age, a real home." "She has you," Ethan said. "That's what matters most." Grace turned to look at him, her blue eyes reflecting the porch light. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, taking her away from everything she knew." From what you've told me, staying wasn't an option. No, Grace agreed softly. It wasn't. They sat in silence again, the swing moving gently. In the distance, an owl called, answered by its mate. My husband, ex-husband, James, he wasn't always. Grace began, then stopped. When we first met, he was charming, attentive. He made me feel special, valued. The controlling behavior started small, suggestions about what I should wear, comments about friends he didn't approve of. By the time I recognized it for what it was, we were married and I was pregnant with Emma. Ethan listened without interrupting, giving her the space to tell her story at her own pace. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward, swore it would never happen again, and I believed him. She gave a bitter laugh. Classic, right? But I was isolated, financially dependent, and terrified of losing my daughter. He made sure I knew he would take her if I left. How did you finally get away? Ethan asked. Grace's hands twisted in her lap. The last time, Emma saw it happen. She was supposed to be asleep, but she came into the room just as She swallowed hard. The look on her face, Ethan. My 6-year-old daughter watching her father hurt her mother. Something in me just broke. Or maybe it finally healed enough for me to find my courage. That took incredible strength, Ethan said, his admiration evident. Or desperation, Grace countered. I filed for divorce the next day, got a restraining order. The court proceedings dragged on for months. I thought once it was final, we'd be free. But James has connections, money. The restraining order meant nothing to him. He started showing up everywhere. Outside Emma's school, at the grocery store. Just watching, letting me know he could get to us anytime he wanted. She shuddered at the memory. The police said they couldn't do anything unless he actually violated the order by approaching us. Then one night, he broke into our apartment. I woke up to find him standing over Emma's bed, just watching her sleep. When I screamed, he attacked me. Ethan's hands clenched involuntarily, his jaw tight with anger on her behalf. I managed to hit the panic button on my phone. The neighbors heard the commotion and called 911. James was arrested, but his family posted bail immediately. That's when I knew we had to disappear. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes clear and direct. I don't regret leaving. I only regret not doing it sooner. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and covered her hand with his. You're doing right by your daughter, Grace. Never doubt that. Grace turned her hand to clasp his, the simple human connection seeming to ground her. I've never told anyone the whole story before. Not like this. Thank you for trusting me with it. They sat that way for a long time, hands joined, the night sounds of the ranch, a peaceful backdrop to the understanding growing between them. The next morning, Ethan woke earlier than usual, a plan forming in his mind. After checking that Grace and Emma were still asleep, he drove into town, returning before they came downstairs for breakfast. What's all this? Grace asked, finding the kitchen table laden with art supplies, colored pencils, sketch pads, watercolors, and modeling clay. Well, Ethan said, suddenly feeling a bit self-conscious. Emma mentioned yesterday that she used to take art classes before you had to leave. I thought she might enjoy having some supplies here. Grace's eyes widened. Ethan, this is too much. These must have cost. It's nothing, he interrupted gently. Truly. I had to go into town anyway for some ranch supplies. Before Grace could protest further, Emma bounded into the kitchen, stopping short at the sight of the art materials. Are those for me? She breathed, her face lighting up with wonder. If your mama says it's okay, Ethan replied, looking to Grace for permission. The joy on her daughter's face seemed to override Grace's concerns. She nodded, smiling despite herself. Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Hayes thought you might like to draw again. Emma launched herself at Ethan, wrapping her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to draw a maverick first, and then the horses, and then the whole ranch. Ethan, momentarily stunned by the child's enthusiastic embrace, awkwardly patted her back. You're welcome, kiddo. I can't wait to see what you create. Over breakfast, Emma chattered excitedly about her artistic plans, while Grace watched Ethan with a new warmth in her eyes. When Emma rushed off to begin her first masterpiece, Grace helped Ethan clear the dishes. That was incredibly thoughtful, she said softly. Art was Emma's refuge when things were bad at home. Having to leave her supplies behind was one of the hardest parts for her. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. It was nothing. Just thought it might make her happy. It did. Grace touched his arm lightly. You're a good man, Ethan Hayes. The simple compliment affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Ethan. Though he continued his work on the ranch and on repairing Grace's cart, his thoughts were increasingly occupied by the woman and child who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Emma's artwork began to decorate the refrigerator and walls, colorful depictions of Maverick, the horses, and the ranch house itself, often with 3 smiling figures standing in front, a tall man, a woman, and a little girl. Grace, too, seemed to be lowering her guard more each day. Her smiles came more readily, and the haunted look in her eyes began to fade. She took to accompanying Ethan on his morning rounds, revealing a natural affinity for ranch work that surprised and impressed him. You're a quick learner, he commented one morning as she expertly checked a newborn calf for signs of illness. Grace smiled, running her hand along the calf's back. My grandparents had a small farm in Idaho when I was growing up. Nothing like this, but I spent summers there until I was a teenager. You never mentioned that. She straightened up, brushing hay from her jeans, a pair Ethan had found in a box of his sister-in-law's things. There's a lot I haven't mentioned. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because you've been in survival mode, Ethan finished for her. No time for sharing life stories when you're running for your life. Grace nodded, grateful for his understanding. Exactly. But being here, it's like I can breathe again. Remember who I was before all this. And who was that? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. A smile touched her lips. A girl who loved animals and open spaces, who wanted to study veterinary medicine before she met a charming city boy who promised her the world. It's not too late, you know, Ethan said. For any of it. Grace's expression turned wistful. Maybe, if we ever stop running. The conversation stayed with Ethan throughout the day, Grace's words echoing in his mind as he worked. That evening, after Emma was asleep, he found Grace in the living room, sorting through some of his mother's old quilting supplies she'd discovered in a closet. I hope you don't mind, she said, looking up as he entered. I thought I might try to finish the quilt she started. It seems a shame to leave it undone. I don't mind at all, Ethan assured her, settling into his father's old armchair. Mom would have liked knowing someone with skill was completing her work. Grace held up a piece of the unfinished quilt, admiring the intricate pattern. She was talented. The stitching is beautiful. She used to say quilting was like life, Ethan recalled. You take pieces that don't seem to go together, and with patience and care, you create something beautiful and useful. Wise woman, Grace murmured, echoing Ethan's earlier comment about her grandmother. Ethan watched her work for a moment, her hands moving with practiced precision. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about stopping running. Grace's hands stilled. Oh? What if you didn't have to run anymore? What if you and Emma stayed here? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had dared voice until now. Grace set down the fabric, her expression guarded. Ethan, we can't impose on you indefinitely. It's not an imposition if I'm asking you to stay, he countered. The ranch is large enough. There's the small cabin by the creek that my foreman used to use before he moved to town. You and Emma could have your own space but still be close enough to be safe. And what would we do here? Quote, Grace asked, though Ethan sensed it wasn't a rejection, merely a practical question. Whatever you want, he said simply. You've already shown you have a knack for ranch work. The local school is always looking for help with after-school programs. Your artistic background would be valuable there. Or you could take online courses, work toward that veterinary degree you mentioned. Grace's eyes widened. You're serious. I am. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Look, I know we haven't known each other long. I'm not asking for anything complicated. Just offering a safe place for you and Emma to catch your breath, figure out your next steps. No pressure, no expectations. Grace studied him, as if trying to read his true intentions. Why would you do this for us? Ethan considered his answer carefully. Because in the week you've been here, this house has felt more like a home than it has in years. Because Emma's laughter is the best sound I've heard in a long time. Because you deserve a chance to build a life without looking over your shoulder every minute." He paused, then added more quietly, "And selfishly, because I'd miss you both when you're gone." Grace's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Ethan assured her. "Just think about it." Later that night, Ethan stood on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. The vastness of it usually made him feel peaceful. But tonight, he felt unsettled. He'd revealed more of his feelings than he'd intended, potentially frightening Grace with the intensity of his attachment to her and Emma after such a short time. He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear her approach until she spoke. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Ethan turned to find Grace standing beside him, wrapped in one of his mother's old cardigans against the night chill. "It is," he agreed. "One of the things I missed most when I was on the rodeo circuit, being able to see the stars like this." Grace looked up at the sparkling canopy. "James hated the countryside. Said it was for people without ambition." "Different kinds of ambition, I suppose," Ethan mused. "Some folks measure success in dollars and status. Others in moments of beauty and peace." "Which kind are you?" Ethan smiled. "I used to think I wanted the bright lights and applause. Took losing almost everything to realize what actually mattered to me." They stood in companionable silence for a while, shoulders almost touching as they gazed at the night sky. "I've been thinking about your offer," Grace said finally. Ethan's heart beat faster, but he kept his voice steady. "And?" "It's tempting," she admitted. "More tempting than I want to admit. But James won't stop looking for us. I can't bring that danger to your door." "I'm not afraid of James Collins," Ethan said firmly. Grace turned to face him. "You should be. He's dangerous, Ethan, and he has resources, connections." "So do I," Ethan replied. "This is my community. People here look out for each other." And I wasn't entirely forthcoming about my law enforcement background. I wasn't just a deputy. I was part of a special task force dealing with domestic violence cases. I know how men like James operate, and I know how to protect you and Emma. Grace's expression showed her surprise at this revelation. "You never said." "Didn't seem relevant until now," Ethan shrugged. "But it means I have contacts in law enforcement across several states. Friends who'd be willing to help ensure your ex-husband understands the consequences of continuing to harass you." Hope and fear warred in Grace's eyes. "It's not that simple." "It can be," Ethan said gently. "Not easy, maybe, but simple. You deserve a life without fear, Grace. Both of you do." Before she could respond, the sound of Emma's frightened cry came from inside the house. Grace was moving before the sound faded, Ethan close behind her. They found Emma sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "Mama!" she cried, reaching out as Grace rushed to her side. "I'm here, sweetheart," Grace soothed, gathering her daughter into her arms. "It was just a bad dream." "He was here," Emma sobbed, clinging to her mother. "Daddy was here, and he was taking me away from you." Grace's eyes met Ethan's over Emma's head, the fear she'd been managing to contain now raw and visible. "No one's taking you anywhere," Grace promised, stroking Emma's hair. "You're safe here with me. With us," she added, including Ethan in her gesture. Ethan moved closer, crouching beside the bed. "That's right, Emma. This is a safe place. Nothing bad is going to happen to you or your mama here." Emma's tearful gaze shifted to him. "Promise?" "I promise," Ethan said solemnly. It took some time to calm Emma enough for her to lie down again. Grace remained beside her, humming softly, while Ethan fetched a glass of water. By the time they were certain she was asleep again, it was well past midnight. In the hallway outside Emma's room, Grace leaned against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "She hasn't had nightmares about him in weeks," she whispered. I thought she was starting to feel secure. "She is," Ethan assured her. That's why the dream upset her so much. She's begun to feel safe here, and the thought of losing that safety frightened her. Grace nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words. I want her to feel safe always, not just for a little while. Then stay, Ethan said simply. Let this be your safe place for as long as you need it. Grace looked up at him, searching his face in the dim light of the hallway. Whatever she saw there seemed to decide something for her. If we stay, she said slowly, I need to contribute. I won't be a charity case. Never thought you would be, Ethan replied. You've already proven your worth around here. Between your help with the ranch books, the cooking, and your knack with the animals, you're earning your keep several times over. A small smile touched Grace's lips. You make it sound so reasonable. It is reasonable, Ethan insisted. You need a safe place. I need help around the ranch. It's practical for both of us. Just practical? Grace asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. No, he admitted. Not just practical, but I would never presume. I know, Grace interrupted softly. That's part of why I trust you, Ethan. You've never presumed anything. She pushed away from the wall, standing straighter. We'll stay, at least for now. But at the first sign of trouble, if James somehow finds us, Emma and I will leave. I won't put you at risk. Agreed, Ethan said, though he had no intention of letting them face danger alone again. Though I think you'll find it harder to track down a horse and cart on a remote Montana ranch than you might expect. Grace's smile widened slightly. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. No thanks needed, he replied. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. Why's that? Grace asked, curious. Ethan grinned. Because we need to get the creek cabin ready for you and Emma to move into. Can't have you living out of a guest room if you're staying on more permanently. The surprise and pleasure that bloomed on Grace's face was worth every moment of uncertainty he'd experienced. As he watched her return to her room, Ethan realized that the empty spaces in his life were beginning to fill with something he'd never expected to find again: hope. The creek cabin transformed under their combined efforts. What had been a utilitarian space for Ethan's former foreman became a cozy home for Grace and Emma. Ethan replaced the worn flooring, fixed the leaky roof, and built a small front porch where Grace could sit in the evenings, watching Emma play in the grassy area that sloped down to the creek. Grace's touch was evident in every corner of the cabin. Curtains made from fabric found in town brightened the windows. The quilt she'd finished, the one Ethan's mother had started years ago, adorned the sofa. Emma's artwork covered the walls, bringing color and life to spaces that had stood empty for too long. Despite the cabin being only a short walk from the main house, Ethan found himself missing their constant presence. The ranch house felt too quiet without Emma's chatter at the breakfast table, or Grace's soft humming as she worked. He took to inviting them for dinner most evenings, claiming he'd made too much food anyway, though all three knew it was an excuse to spend time together. Spring blossomed fully across Clearwater Valley, the land turning emerald green as wildflowers dotted the meadows. Emma started attending the local school, where she quickly made friends and impressed her teachers with her artistic talents. Grace found part-time work at the veterinary clinic in town, her natural way with animals and quick mind making her an invaluable assistant. Ethan watched them flourish with a mixture of joy and an unnamed ache. They were building a life here, putting down roots in his soil, yet he held back from asking for more than the friendship they shared. After what Grace had endured, he refused to pressure her in any way, content to be a safe harbor for her and Emma. On a warm Saturday in May, Ethan hosted a small barbecue at the ranch. Mike, his part-time ranch hand, came with his wife and children. Dr. Jensen from the vet clinic attended with her husband. Sheriff Davis stopped by briefly, tipping his hat to Grace with a knowing smile that made Ethan wonder what conclusions the town had drawn about their arrangement. As twilight settled over the gathering, Ethan found himself standing apart, watching Grace laugh at something Mike's wife said. Emma was playing tag with the other children, her joyful shrieks echoing across the yard. The scene stirred something profound in Ethan's chest, a longing he'd been trying to ignore. "You know, son," Sheriff Davis said, appearing at Ethan's side with a plate of food. I haven't seen you look this content since before your parents passed. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Just nice to have people around the place again. Davis gave him a skeptical look. Uh-huh. And I suppose it has nothing to do with that particular woman and her daughter? Ethan sighed, knowing better than to try deceiving the man who'd known him since childhood. It's complicated, Tom. Only because you're making it so, Davis replied, taking a bite of brisket. Anyone with eyes can see how you feel about them. And how they feel about you. Before Ethan could respond, Emma came running over, breathless with excitement. Ethan, come see what we found by the creek. He allowed himself to be pulled away, grateful for the interruption. Emma led him to where the other children were gathered at the creek's edge, pointing excitedly at something in the water. Look, Emma cried. Baby ducks! Sure enough, a mother mallard was guiding her ducklings along the shallow edge of the creek, the tiny birds bobbing in her wake like little yellow-brown puffballs. Well, would you look at that? Ethan said, crouching beside Emma. First brood of the season. Can we feed them? One of Mike's children asked eagerly. Better not, Ethan advised. Wild ducks need to find their own food, and Mama Duck might get nervous if we get too close. The children accepted this with minimal disappointment, content to watch the duck family's progress downstream. As they observed, Ethan felt a light touch on his shoulder. Grace had joined them, her face softened by the evening light. Beautiful, aren't they? She murmured. They are, Ethan agreed, though his eyes had shifted from the ducks to her face. Grace caught his gaze and held it for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. The moment was broken when one of the ducklings strayed too far from its mother, causing Emma to gasp in concern. The mother duck quacked sharply, and the wayward duckling quickly rejoined its siblings. She's a good mama, Emma observed seriously. She keeps them all safe. Just like your mama keeps you safe, Ethan replied, earning a warm smile from Grace. As the evening wound down and their guests departed, Emma fell asleep on the porch swing, worn out from the day's excitement. Ethan carried her back to the cabin, Grace walking beside him, with Maverick trailing faithfully behind. She had a wonderful time today, Grace said softly, as Ethan laid Emma gently on her bed. We both did. I'm glad, Ethan replied, stepping back to let Grace tuck her daughter in. It's good to have friends around sometimes. They moved to the small front porch, neither quite ready to end the evening. The night was warm, the air sweet with the scent of wild roses that grew along the creek bank. Crickets chirped in the grass, and in the distance, a whippoorwill called. I got a letter from my cousin in Oregon today, Grace said after a comfortable silence. Ethan's heart sank. Was this the moment she would tell him they were leaving? He forced his voice to remain steady. Oh? Grace nodded, her eyes on the distant mountains silhouetted against the night sky. She's been worried about us. I hadn't been in touch since we left the last place. I'm sure she was relieved to hear you're safe, Ethan said carefully. She was. She also offered again to have us come stay with her. Grace turned to look at him directly. I told her we found a home here. The simple statement sent a surge of relief through Ethan. You have a home here for as long as you want it, he assured her. Grace smiled, the moonlight silvering her features. I know, that's what makes it so precious. She stepped closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. Emma asked me something interesting yesterday. She wanted to know if you were going to be her new daddy. Ethan's breath caught. What did you tell her? I told her that's not something I could decide on my own. Grace replied softly, that it would be up to you as well. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. Grace, I would never presume. I know, she interrupted gently. You've never presumed anything. You've been patient, kind, respectful of our boundaries. But Ethan, her voice dropped to a whisper, what do you want? The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Ethan took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment for complete honesty. I want you to stay, he said simply. Both of you, not just in the cabin, not just on the ranch. I want you in my life, permanently. I've fallen in love with you, Grace, and with Emma. I know it hasn't been long, and I know you've been through hell, and if friendship is all you can offer right now, I'll treasure that. But if you're asking what I want, Grace's hand tightened on his. I'm asking. I want to build a life with you, Ethan said, the words flowing easier now. I want to watch Emma grow up, help her learn to ride, send her off to her first dance, walk her down the aisle someday if she'd let me. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to face whatever comes, good or bad, together. Grace's eyes glistened in the moonlight. I'm scared, Ethan. Not of you, never of you, but of believing in this, in us, and having it taken away. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, Ethan said honestly, but I can promise you won't face it alone. Not ever again. Grace stepped closer, until barely an inch separated them. Emma thinks you'd make a good daddy. What do you think? Ethan asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Grace rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a kiss so gentle it nearly broke his heart. When she pulled back, her smile was like the sunrise after the longest night. I think she's right, Grace whispered. The following weeks passed in a blur of happiness for Ethan. Though nothing changed in their living arrangements, Grace and Emma remained in the cabin. Everything felt different. The stolen kisses when Emma wasn't looking, the lingering touches as they worked side by side, the long conversations on the cabin porch after Emma was asleep, all of it wove a tapestry of deepening connection between them. June arrived with a heat wave that turned the valley golden. Ethan spent long days in the fields rushing to get the first hay cutting done before rain threatened. Grace juggled her work at the clinic with helping around the ranch, while Emma reveled in the freedom of summer vacation, spending hours exploring the creek banks and meadows with Maverick as her constant companion. One particularly scorching afternoon, Ethan returned from the fields to find Grace and Emma at the swimming hole, a deep, clear pool in the creek that generations of Hayes children had used as a natural swimming pool. Emma was splashing joyfully in the shallows while Grace sat on a flat rock, her feet dangling in the water, watching her daughter with a contented smile. The domestic tranquility of the scene struck Ethan with almost physical force. This was what he wanted. Not someday, but now. Room for one more? He called, setting down his hat on a nearby rock. Emma's face lit up. Ethan, come swimming with us. Mama taught me how to float on my back. Did she now? Ethan grinned, kicking off his boots. I'd like to see that. He waded into the cool water, sighing with relief as it soothed his sun-heated skin. Emma immediately demanded a demonstration of her new skill, floating proudly while Ethan praised her progress. Grace watched them, her expression soft with an emotion Ethan was beginning to recognize and treasure. After Emma had tired herself out with swimming, the three of them sprawled on the grassy bank, letting the sun dry their skin. Emma, drowsy from the exertion and heat, soon fell asleep between them, her head resting on Grace's lap while her feet pressed against Ethan's side. I've been thinking, Ethan said quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping child. That sounds dangerous, Grace teased, her fingers gently combing through Emma's damp hair. Ethan smiled. Maybe it is. He took a deep breath. The cabin's working out well for you two, but with the hot summer coming on, it's going to get pretty warm in there. The main house is cooler, with the big shade trees and better cross-ventilation. Grace raised an eyebrow. Are you inviting us to move in with you because of the weather, Ethan Hayes? He chuckled, caught in his transparent excuse. Not just because of the weather, no. Then why? Grace pressed, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. Ethan reached across Emma's sleeping form to take Grace's hand. Because I love waking up and knowing you're nearby. But I hate saying goodnight and watching you walk away. Because Emma asks me every morning if I'll be there when she gets home from playing with her friends, and I always want the answer to be yes. Because we're already a family in every way that matters, except on paper and under the same roof. Grace's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Ethan nodded, his throat suddenly dry. I am. I love you, Grace. I love Emma. I want us to be a real family. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Ethan, Before she could continue, the moment was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching on the main road. Ethan frowned, not expecting visitors. Few people came out this far unless they had specific business with the ranch. "Stay here with Emma," he said, rising to his feet. "I'll see who it is." Grace nodded, her expression suddenly wary. The intrusion of the outside world had shattered the idyllic bubble of their afternoon. Ethan made his way quickly back to the house, his wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to his skin. As he rounded the bend in the driveway, he saw a sleek black SUV with rental plates parked in front of the ranch house. A man in an expensive suit stood beside it, looking around with an air of contempt. Even before the man turned to face him, Ethan knew who it was. The set of his shoulders, the expensive watch glinting in the sunlight, the air of entitlement. It all matched Grace's descriptions too perfectly. "Can I help you?" Ethan called, keeping his voice neutral despite the surge of protective anger that rose in his chest. James Collins turned, his handsome face arranged in a practiced smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "I certainly hope so. I'm looking for my wife and daughter. I have reason to believe they might be in this area." Ethan maintained a carefully blank expression. "Your wife and daughter?" "Yes, Grace and Emma Collins." James reached into his jacket pocket and produced a photograph, holding it out. "This is them. Have you seen them?" Ethan made a show of studying the photo, a studio portrait of Grace and Emma, both with fixed smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Grace looked thinner, more tense than the woman he knew now. Emma appeared smaller, almost diminished. "Can't say that I have," Ethan replied, handing the photo back. "Not many folks come out this way. We're pretty isolated." James's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you are?" "Ethan Hayes. This is my ranch." "I see." James glanced around, his gaze calculating. "Mind if I look around?" "My sources indicated they might have passed through this area." "Actually, I do mind," Ethan said firmly. "This is private property, Mr. Collins." James's friendly facade slipped slightly. "How did you know my name? I don't believe I mentioned it." Ethan cursed his carelessness inwardly, but kept his expression neutral. "You're looking for the Collins family. Seemed reasonable to assume that's your name too." James studied him for a long moment, clearly suspicious. "Of course. Logical deduction." His tone hardened. "Mr. Hayes, I don't think you understand the situation. My mentally unstable wife has kidnapped my daughter. There are warrants out for her arrest. If you're harboring them, you could face serious charges." "That's quite an accusation," Ethan replied calmly. "Do you have documentation of these warrants?" James's mouth tightened. "I can have my attorney forward them to you, or you could simply tell me if they're here and avoid any legal complications for yourself." "As I said, I haven't seen anyone matching their description." Ethan crossed his arms. "Now, unless you have a search warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." Something dangerous flickered in James's eyes. "You're making a mistake, cowboy. I have resources you can't imagine. I will find my family, and anyone who gets in my way will regret it." "Is that a threat, Mr. Collins?" Ethan asked quietly. "Just a fact," James replied with a cold smile. "I always get what's mine." The possessive claim made Ethan's blood boil, but he kept his temper in check. "I believe we're done here. The road you came in on will take you back to town." James held his gaze for a long moment before turning back to his SUV. "This isn't over," he said as he opened the driver's door. "Not by a long shot." Ethan watched as the vehicle pulled away, dust billowing in its wake. Only when it had disappeared from view did he allow himself to release the breath he'd been holding. He needed to get back to Grace and Emma immediately. He found them still at the swimming hole, though Grace was now standing, tension evident in every line of her body. Emma remained asleep on the grass, oblivious to the danger that had just passed so close. "Who was it?" Grace asked as soon as he approached, though the fear in her eyes suggested she already knew. "James," Ethan confirmed grimly. "He's looking for you." All the color drained from Grace's face. "He found us." "How? We were so careful." "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But he's gone for now. I told him I hadn't seen you." Grace shook her head, panic rising in her expression. "It doesn't matter. He knows we're in the area. He won't stop looking. She knelt beside Emma, gently, shaking her awake. Emma, sweetheart, we need to go. Go where, Mama? Emma asked sleepily, rubbing her eyes. We have to leave, Grace said, her voice breaking slightly. Pack our things. Ethan knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Grace's arm. Wait, just wait a minute. You don't understand, Grace insisted, her eyes wild with fear. You don't know what he's capable of. I have a pretty good idea, Ethan replied steadily. And running isn't the answer, not this time. What are you talking about? Grace demanded, her voice rising with panic. Of course we have to run. He found us. Emma looked between them, confusion and fear dawning on her small face. Is it Daddy? Is he here? No, sweetheart, Ethan assured her, and he's not going to hurt you or your mama. Not ever again. Grace stared at him. Ethan, you can't promise that. Actually, I can. Ethan took both her hands in his. Remember when I told you I had contacts in law enforcement? While you two were getting settled here, I reached out to some old colleagues. We've been building a case against James, documenting the restraining order violations, the assault, the stalking across state lines. Grace's eyes widened. You what? I wanted to wait until everything was in place before telling you, Ethan explained. But James showing up forces our hand. My friend in the FBI has been waiting for James to cross state lines in pursuit of you. It makes it a federal case with much harsher penalties. The FBI? Grace repeated incredulously. Ethan nodded. Stalking across state lines is a federal offense. So is violating a restraining order by crossing state boundaries. James just did both. He squeezed her hands gently. All we need to do is call Sheriff Davis. He'll contact my FBI friend, and they'll pick James up before he even reaches town. Emma tugged at Grace's sleeve. Mama, I don't want to leave. This is our home now. The simple statement seemed to cut through Grace's panic. She looked down at her daughter, then back at Ethan, hope warring with fear in her eyes. Can it really be that simple? She whispered. Not simple, Ethan admitted. There will be statements to give, testimony if it goes to trial. But you won't face it alone, and when it's over, James won't be able to threaten you anymore. Grace took a shaky breath. I've been running for so long I don't know how to stand and fight. You've been fighting every day, Ethan countered, fighting to protect Emma, to build a new life. Now let others fight alongside you. Emma, sensing the gravity of the moment, pressed against her mother's side. Please, Mama, I want to stay with Ethan and Maverick and my friends at school. Grace looked from her daughter to Ethan, and he saw the moment when determination replaced fear in her eyes. Okay, she said finally. We'll stay. We'll fight. Ethan's relief was palpable. I'll call Tom right now. The events that followed seemed to unfold with dizzying speed. Sheriff Davis arrived at the ranch within 30 minutes, took their statements, and immediately contacted Ethan's FBI friend. James was apprehended at his hotel in town that evening, the charges serious enough that bail was denied. In the days that followed, Grace gave formal statements to the FBI agents who arrived from the field office in Helena. Emma was spared most of the details, protected by both Grace and Ethan from the uglier aspects of the legal proceedings. 2 weeks after James's arrest, Grace sat with Ethan on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Emma was inside, working on a new art project. A family portrait, she'd announced proudly. The FBI agent called today, Grace said, breaking the comfortable silence. James has agreed to a plea deal. 5 years minimum, with a permanent restraining order that covers all 50 states. They're also freezing most of his assets pending a civil suit. Ethan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. How do you feel about that? Grace considered the question seriously. Relieved. Sad for the man I thought he was when we first met. But mostly, free. She turned to face him fully. For the first time in years, I feel truly free. Good, Ethan said simply. That's all I've wanted for you. Grace smiled, the last light of day gilding her features. Not all, I think. Ethan raised an eyebrow questioningly. Before James showed up that day, Grace reminded him, you were asking me something important. Something about us becoming a real family. Ethan's heart quickened. I was. I never got to answer, Grace said softly. And now? Ethan asked, hardly daring to hope. Grace leaned closer, her eyes reflecting the first evening stars. Now I'm ready to stop running from happiness too. Emma and I have found our home here. With you, if the offer still stands. Ethan didn't let her finish.